morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Elsevier live session today. It really gives me great pleasure today to introduce you to Professor Brian Dolan, OBE. Let me just give you a little bit of background on Professor Dolan. He is Director of Health Service 360 in the UK and has a clinical background in acute mental health and emergency nursing. He's also a visiting professor of nursing at the Oxford Institute of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Research and honorary professor of leadership in healthcare at the University of Salford. He normally works in New Zealand, Australia, the UK and Ireland, so is quite used to a bit of travel. And is the author of 7 books on emergency nursing and leadership, including with his co-author Amy Overend, the incredibly popular Elsevier title, A Nurse's Survival Guide to Leadership and Management on the Ward, which is now in its 3rd edition. Professor Dolan is the originator of the End PJ Paralysis and Last 1000 Days Global Social Movements, and in the 2019 New Year's Honours List was awarded an OBE by Her Majesty the Queen for services to nursing and emergency care. So, I think it's fair to say that we're in very safe hands today and really lucky to get some of Professor Dolan's time, not least because it's very late in New Zealand right now, where he's dialing in from. So Professor Dolan is here today to talk to us about the impact of leadership, culture and influence. And so Professor Dolan, if I may hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very generous obituary, and welcome all of you. It's really great to have you along here. I didn't know I had so many cousins. And I'm Brian Dolan, and for the next, 8 or 9 hours, we'll just see how this thing goes. I'm going to be talking about the impact of leadership, culture, and instance and thoughts around all of that. And starting with, what I think of as a definition for me is, to my mind, leadership above all is a social process in which one person influences another and influences the behavior of others without threat or violence. That bit is really quite important as well. But what really matters is how you do it that counts. That's what matters most. And when you have influence, when you have leadership, it actually takes courage. And there you are walking down, it's your graduation, and you're walking past all your professors and they're going, how the heck, how did this happen? And you're saying, yeah, I had the courage to do this. And it's while this is aimed at nursing students, medical students, therapy students that are here, it's also open to, it's great to have educators along and anyone who's around for this session. And this is being recorded and on the 30th of September. And 2 days ago, exactly 39 years to the day, I started in nursing. I started in psychiatric nursing in the west coast of Ireland. I'm really proud to be from there. And then with my general, I fancied a bit of foreign travel, so I moved to England, did my general nursing. And I'm really, really proud to be a nurse. But one thing I know is, while things have dramatically changed, whether it's technology or models of care or facilities, things that have not changed across all those years is people's desire to come into professions to care for other people. And that takes courage, because we could have easily lead easier lives, but we've chosen to live a life of purpose, and that it takes courage. And the thing is, when it comes to leadership, Martin Luther King, he talked about what he believed, I believe, and he talked about his dream. What Martin Luther King didn't say is, do you know what? I've come up with a 10-point plan. Are you interested in hearing it? Nobody got excited by a Gantt chart. They got excited because they believed what he believed. But this is the thing when it comes to communication, is most leaders under-communicate by a factor of 10. When you think it's being communicated, you may to double, quadruple, quintuple it, because you can't over-communicate. And just because people ask questions, that doesn't mean resistance. It's more often about people trying to process what it is you're trying to do. People trying to understand, because while you may have a lot of time to think about it, for some people it kind of comes as a surprise, and they will ask questions, but don't assume they're against it. It may simply be they're trying to understand it. And that goes back to the point about never underestimating the importance of communication on a frequent basis, but also not underestimating the power of giving people permission To my mind, leaders are directors of permission giving. That's what their real job. And here's a question. What would you do if you knew the answer was yes? What would you do? And that might be something for you to reflect upon because it takes time. It's one conversation, one heart, one mind at a time. That's how change occurs. That's how influence happens. Not at the first people change and then organizations change in that order. But when you're first starting out in your career, what we all had is all these islands of knowledge that we couldn't see how they all came together. And as you gain experience, you start to see that they join up and they start to connect together. And when you get really experienced and you get really good at what you do, you see more than just knowledge and experience. You get creative with that knowledge about how you turn it into things that make something unique and glorious. In this case, a cat. But remember this, as a good friend of mine, Roy Lilly, says, start with the patient and work backwards. What you may design and what the user experience will be could be something completely different. And when we start with the patient, we're never going to go too far astray. And we know this, when it works for patients, it always works for staff as well. Because culture doesn't change simply because we want it to change. It changes when people's behavior and their everyday realities change, their beliefs change, how they do things change. That's when culture changes, not because of desire, but because of behavior and everyday realities. But it's also about the choices we make. We have a choice of our attitude. If somebody has got a bad attitude, that is a choice that they made. It wasn't imposed upon them. Life is 20% of what happens to us and 80% about how we choose to react to it. Our behavior is a choice. Just because you behave badly doesn't obligate me to behave badly. That is a choice. And our responses are a choice. If someone gets angry at me, I'm not obligated to get angry back. It becomes a choice, just as our passions are. And sometimes our passions take a long time to evolve. Sometimes we just wake up and it's just there. We come into something, in my case, into nursing. And from the get-go, from that first day, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm now part of something bigger and I already love this. And that has not changed at all. But for some people, it might be their part of their wider hinterland. They may do stuff that does what they need to do in the workplace, but their other passion is elsewhere. And interestingly, Nobel laureates were far more likely to have a hinterland. And it's really important that you have a hinterland. It's no more than just about the narrow depth of learning. It's about the breadth of a wider interaction and with the world. And a really high proportion of Nobel laureates were, as well as being brilliant in chemistry or medicine or physics, they also were brilliant in music. They might be woodworkers. And it's also important to remember that these other passions can actually feed into the passions you have. And here's the other thing that's important to hold on to, that while not all readers are leaders, every leader reads. And read beyond the confines of your discipline. Read broadly, read widely, because actually that will inform you and enrich in so many ways. Because here's a choice we have. We either make ourselves miserable or we make ourselves strong, and the amount of work, the amount of energy we put into it is the same. And let's be honest, isn't it far more interesting and far more fun to work with Tigger than Eeyore? Because at the end, what really matters is how you see you, not how others see you. Because real leadership starts from within. That's where it begins. That's how you see you and how you speak to you. Because I can tell you this, the person you talk to more than anybody is yourself. And if you spoke to your mates the way you speak to yourself sometimes, you wouldn't have any. So start being kind to yourself. The greatest gift I think anyone can give themselves is simply to like themselves. That's it. Just liking yourself, not some sort of narcissistic self-regulate, idolatry. This sort of, oh my God, I'm so amazing. Who's in the world lucky to have me? This just, I am enough. I'm okay. This is who I am. and I will be kind to me. And as the great Irish poet John O'Donoghue says, be kind to others, but also be exceedingly kind to yourself. Because to my mind, leadership is not about control, it's really about influence. And I've been an executive director in an NHS trust where it had 1,000 beds. I was a clinical director of a couple of emergency departments, still relatively unusual for nurses to do. I had a nice corner office, the millions in budgets, the hundreds of staff. I had all of those trappings. Actually, now I'm in, in a 3,000 square meter design lab, one of the largest of its kind in the world, where we mock up life-size buildings or wards, mock-ups of operating theatres, pediatrics areas, and we built this in part in response to the earthquakes that we had in 2010-11, where 45 out of 200 buildings were damaged in the Canterbury health system, an extraordinary health system. Now, I don't have any budget, I don't have any staff, I don't have any office, but what I have is influence. And I can tell you this, it's so much more fun than control and power. So let's look at a real life example of what can happen when you start to gain and apply influence. And I kind of accidentally created a global social movement. You know the way you do, just the crack, the Irish variety, in case anyone from America is tuning in. And it's called End PJ Paralysis, because people go into hospital, they get in their pajamas and they're paralyzed in their pajamas till the day they leave. So the campaign is called End PJ Paralysis. And about this time 4 years ago, I'd been in Nottingham the week before, and then I was over in Broken Hill in the outback of New South Wales. And I was communicating with great friends of mine, Tim Gillett and Anne-Marie Riley. Tim and also Pete Gordon, they both work for the Emergency Care Intensive Support Team. Anne-Marie Riley is now doing a fantastic job as the interim director of nursing in Walsall in the Midlands. And we were tossing over and back email messages, and I can't actually remember what their tweet to me was, but mine was this: nursing was born in the church and raised in the army, so leaving patients in their pajamas is their uniform. Let's fix that, which within days turned into, let's end PJ paralysis, that action to do this. And this becomes important because that's when you start to, from emotion to the evidence. When you start looking at the evidence, if you are 80 years of age, 1 week in a hospital can equal a loss of 20% of quads power, 1.5 kilos of muscle mass, 10% of aerobic capacity. You can lose demineralization of bone, muscle weakness. You're 5 times more likely to end up in institutional care. This is harm. Deconditioning is a bigger harm event than falls and pressure sores combined. And it doesn't take long. In the first 24 hours, muscle power can reduce by 2 to 5%. And if you're wondering what that represents, that would be the ability to pick up a cup of tea or a bottle of water. The circulating volume drops by 5%. Within the first 7 days, circulating volume drops by 20%. VO2 max, 8 to 15%, and on it goes. Skin integrity is compromised. Peristalsis slows down, so people get constipation. And yet, we have known this for nearly 80 years. In 1947, about 6 months before the birth of the National Health Service in Britain, Dr. Richard Asher, a renal physician, wrote a paper called, in a British medical journal, The Dangers of Going to Bed. And while he didn't talk about deconditioning, he talked about every body system being affected by staying in bed. And he revisited some liturgy, and he said, to teach me to dread going to bed. And he was absolutely on the money. We have known this for 80 years, and we look at our gerontology colleagues who have been pushing this barrow for such a long time. Our physio colleagues, movement is their model of care, but we've known about it. So how do you connect people to this thing? But what we do is, oh my God, if we let them out of bed, they might fall. So it's like, yeah, that's the most terrible thing we could do. And in fact, if you look at falls prevention, our problem is with our language, because instead of talking about falls prevention, maybe we should be talking about safer mobility. And the most dangerous word, as a great physiotherapist, Chris Tuckett, talks about, the most dangerous word in healthcare is the word safe. Because here's the trouble. While we're busy keeping taking no risks with our patients are taking all of the risks. Because while we keep them in bed, not because they clinically need to be, but there's very few, when you look at the medical notes, there's very few explicit person needs to be saying about for clinical reasons. I think in one case it was less than 13%. We need to think about it in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy is water and food, and then there's safety and there's heat, and at the top is self-actualization. And once you've got the food and water sorted, actually what most people want is to live. And you think about this, the time we're living in right now, where we're being bundled into staying at home and the world's biggest social experiment of lockdown. And what worries me is there are millions of people deconditioning in their own homes because we are trying to keep them safe. And on one level, there's absolutely right that we do so, but the unintended consequence is the deconditioning of older people, because it's not just in a hospital bed, and it's not just older people, it's across all ages. So why did we do it? Why did this matter? Well, this is where we draw on the work of Hymans and Timms, and they've written a wonderful book called New Power. And they articulated three principles for spreading change: actionable, connected, extensionable. Actionable is, it is an action. End PJ paralysis. Get up, get dressed, get moving. Black Lives Matter. Me too. Those are actions. Connected is, it makes sense to people. They want to be part of it. It makes sense. They want to own it. This is part of us. And extensible is people following your mission on their terms because they own it. Because the key message is this: time is the most important currency in healthcare. And while our time is busy and important, our patients' time is sacred. So the action is, how do we look after people's time and not waste it? And that brings me to this 80-second video. And if you will, have a look at this.
The day's almost over, the sky's about to show her the first glimpse of gold over waking up dreams. Thing is, I don't know why things that I felt so concerned with just let go and drift. I've been running around for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. Like the moonlit late plains that questions just hang. All I need is time with your love. I've been running around looking for answers. All of these days there still ain't enough. There ain't enough. Time with you. There ain't enough.
I'd like to give a shout out to Will Dolan, yes, relation, my son, and Asher Hardy of firewoodpictures.co.uk, who created this beautiful story. And I also want to shout out Linda Holt, who's done a talk last week around the stories you tell yourself, which I'd encourage you to watch as well, for all the slides and getting us to this place. But when you look at that, and you'll notice, by the way, that only one of those scenes was in a hospital, because people were just living their lives. And hopefully for all of us, our lives will be this big, and the bit in a hospital setting is just that big. But let me ask you a question rhetorically, and it's this: if you had 1,000 days left to live, how many would you choose to spend in hospital? And I suspect for the vast, vast majority of you, the answer is none. And it certainly would be for me as well. And it's about, how do we enable people to live as much of their time as they can with their loved ones? And no matter how kind and decent we are, the hospital isn't a place for many of them that they need to be, unless it's necessary. And sometimes a better question than asking, is this patient safe to go home? We should also be asking, is this patient safe to be admitted? Because the facts are and the actions are about deconditioning causes harm. It keeps people in hospital and it steals their time. And the look at the feedback of Simon Weldon, who's the chief exec or was in Kettering. When you have a life-limiting illness, each minute becomes precious, and waiting minute feels like 10. Waiting 10 minutes feels like half an hour. Waiting half an hour feels like an eternity. And we're recording this on the 30th of September, and this today would have been my father's 94th birthday, and he died in 2004. And a few weeks before he died, he spent about 2 hours in outpatients, and those are 2 hours when he was literally in those last days of his last 1,000 days, and he got home and he went to bed for 2 days because he was just exhausted. And it's how do we make sure that that time, not because of bad people, but systems don't work as well as they could. And our job collectively is influence and change the culture that says you have to come in. When actually, as we've seen, one of the things with COVID is not necessarily so anymore. And what we did is those actions led to, from those conversations early on, the chief nursing officer, the then chief nursing officer of England, Jane Cummings, and then all the CNOs got behind it. We said, let's have a 1 million patient day challenge across 70 days. And there was posters created because people believed what we believed, and they supported it. And you had all kinds of people getting behind it. And where did we get to? Well, by the end of that 70 days, there was over 710,000 people mobilized and 703,000 dressed. And people might say, but you missed the target, but we didn't miss the point. And to my mind, the interesting number is the bottom number, is the cherry on the cake, because that reflected a shift in culture where it became normalized to see people dressed. And we're running a campaign right now in New South Wales, in Western New South Wales. And I spoke to the nurse manager this afternoon. She says, we have gone over a month without a person falling. We have 70% of our patients up every single day. And what's working is that the staff are doing it. They're doing it the weekends or not here because they own it. They believe in it. It feels great for them. And they know their patients and their loved ones know it's great for them too. So it's gone way beyond this. And I say to people, I don't own NPJ paralysis. And I created the last 1,000 days too. NPJ paralysis is the way to make it happen. I don't own it because I don't own it. Then all of us can own it. We can own, and we don't, it doesn't matter what it's called, whether it's get up, get dressed, get moving, end bed centricity in Holland, everybody move in the States. What really matters is we all want the same thing. And you see people sharing messages with patients. Michelle, who's a comms lead, associate director in Bristol, she created a Spotify playlist which you could access. I like to move it, get up, stand up, take me out. So you have to bring fun and joy into us. And Tim Gillett sent me a line from Bohemian Rhapsody, and I didn't know I could do this, but over the course of a couple of hours, I rewrote it. I'll show you that in a minute. People having fun. This is in the chief nurse, executive director of nursing in Melbourne, emailed me this evening, in fact, to say this is how they've done with theirs. That guy on the right is the big in the stripes is the chief executive, and yes, that is me in a wee Willy Winky number. But when it comes to NPJ paralysis, Bohemian, because it's like I rewrote the words. Is this the real life? Or PJ fantasy, caught on a pat slide, no escape from reality. And he goes on, pajamas, just killed a man, put some PJs on his bed, made him wear, now he's dead. And mama, life had just begun. Now I've gone and thrown PJs away. And if you inject fun and humor, but you can still get through a serious message, and then these awesome women in Crewe, the Dolan sisters, sang it in front of a room of well over 100 medical nursing therapy students, qualified staff, patients, and everyone had fun while bringing through a good important message, which changes people's lives because it's a connection as well. And last year we ran a global summit. We now have a vibrant community on Facebook. If you look up again, PJ Plus, we've got about 2,500 members. This year we did another one. And I should say, if you go into NPJ Paralysis, you'll be able to get in there free and join it. And you'll see, we've got about 50 lectures. And Elsevier, thank you, very supportive of that with that event in the summit that we held in July. So what about you? What about how, I didn't wake up one morning to start this. It's driven by connecting with people, trusting people, enabling people, giving stuff away. The more you give away, the better you are. Don't hoard. No, power is pointless. Knowledge is pointless unless it's given away to other people. So this is what I would suggest you do to maximize your impact. Don't waste your energy on things you can make no difference with. Don't, it's a waste of your energy. Instead, tackle bite-sized chunks. It's far better to create 1,000 stories of change than one that kind of half limps along that was kind of big and that burns people out. Know what you're trying to achieve. When you give yourself a target, you're more likely to hit it. Be clear what you're trying to achieve. And remember the big picture. That's really quite important, because while you get lost in the weeds, you might remember to actually just look up every now and again. But focus on what you can control. That's what's really very important. And it's about putting your energy into these sorts of things. And, you know, Immanuel Kant, the 18th century philosopher, he said the three things, rules of happiness are something to do, someone to love, something to hope for. And I think that's really very important to hold on to. And there's some people that they're so poor that all they have is money. But social millionaires are people who believe that they can make a difference. They believe that what they do matters. And if at the end of your last 1,000 days, and hopefully that'll be many, many, many days into the future, if you could look back on your life and say, I was loved, I mattered, I was enough, I made a difference, I valued people's time, what I did mattered to my community, to the profession I was so proud to be a member of, then you can say you led the life of a social millionaire. But hold on to explore what's possible. Dream out loud at high volume, and know that leadership isn't a title, it's a set of behaviors. It's a belief that you can make a difference. You'll throw a stone and watch it ripple. And as the greatest Kiwi of all said, remember this, in the end, it's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. And thank you for your time.
Well, Brian, I think it should be us thanking you for your time. Thank you so much for that very inspirational session. We've had lots of comments of people agreeing with what you're saying and also asking questions. So if you wouldn't mind, could you take a couple of questions for us now?
Oh, really very happy. Yeah, delighted to.
Great. So if you just bear with me. So we've had some people asking for some practical tips. So can you become a leader alone, or do you need the cooperation of other people? Is a question that's come in.
That one. Yes. I think you're far better if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go even further, go with others. Because if you are the lone wolf doesn't get very far, because eventually they starve on their own. But when you actually have a pack, and maybe a wolf isn't the best metaphor in this instance, but actually it's about sharing. Well, you watch how birds fly. They go and they take over and they support each other. That's the trick. So always get people around you, because sometimes you will carry them and other times you need to be carried. So my advice always is it takes a village.
That's very good advice. We have another question here. How do you get people to see your real worth in an organization when the culture is biased towards favoritism and opinions of certain members? I'm sure we've all come up against
that came up only, actually I was looking at this, trying Daniel Pinker. If you go and Google Daniel Pinker, he does a little blog every couple of weeks, and it's great. And he's talking about a woman called Olga, who came from Russia, moved to Texas, didn't speak the language, and was a real outsider. And she's written a book called Weird. And what she talks about is fit in at first, fit in. So people say, oh yeah, you're kind of, yes, you are like us. And as you kind of start to fit in, actually then you gain, well, I can't remember the phrase she used, but it's about credits. You gain the credits of your, and the Kiwis use the word mana, which means authority, respect. And you have to also stay true and have integrity. Stick to that, even when it is hard, because this is a long journey. I've lived in these places where there's people who are favorites and all of this sort of stuff. You have to stay true to yourself, because that matters. Because over time, where you are true, and it is a decency and an authenticity, people will start to follow you. But you have to think of this. Sometimes it's a marathon, sometimes it's a sprint. But you know, that's okay. So it's not sometimes that people leave organizations, they leave their managers. And sometimes if it's not, if you're not going to fit, you can also make some choices as much as you can. But don't lose sight of what matters to you, and just check in with others. Is my truth actually what is it valid? So test it as always as well. And it is okay to change your mind.
That's great. Thanks, Brian. We do have a couple more questions. Are you okay to just take a
Oh,
couple
yeah.
more? Well,
Oh,
we've
yeah.
actually got a lot more than a couple. We've got this really nice question here, which I'm sure lots of people would want to ask. How can I trust myself to be good enough myself to lead others?
That is a wonderful question. And I think it starts with your values. How, and it's not, it's funny enough, it's counterintuitive. It's don't treat others as you would wish to be treated, because they might not want to be treated how you would want to be treated.
Mhm.
Find out how they like to be treated. But hold true to yourself, and decency, kindness, be fair, be respectful. All of those things are values and behaviors. So not losing sight of the decency that is within you, and the decency that's in yours, and watch others that you aspire to be. Watch others who I say, when I grow up, I want to be. Watch how they behave and how they influence. And actually, it's not to sort of ta-da. Often it's the nice, quiet, gentle words that have the most impact. But showing people respect and making people feel visible. One thing I always do everywhere I go is I try and catch the eye of the cleaners and the porters, because actually, and just smile and say hello. That isn't about being a decent human being. What that's about, to my mind, is making people feel visible. Never lose sight of the importance of being made to feel visible, because never losing, no matter how rich, how smart, how much status, how much money you have, how many qualifications you have, integrity is everything.
That's great. Another really, really good advice there, Brian. I've got another question here, and I'm going to read it out because it starts really nicely. Sorry if I missed this. The doorbell just went. I guess that's the problem of a lot of us being at home. How can we distinguish between what's an impossible task and what is manageable? So I think you talked about, making an influence on the things that you can influence, particularly in a culture where people are stuck in their ways.
Yeah, and the only difference between a rut and a grave is depth. Because some people just keep plowing a furrow and they just don't ever change. And sometimes you have to say, right, let's just head upstream mentally and say, right, what is this about? What are the bits I can manage? Which are the bits I can control? And those are my circle of influence. My circle of concern is the bits I actually can't control. That's their behavior, their attitudes, their way of working. And if you can't control it, allow yourself to let it go and focus on the things you can control. And that's where your greatest influence is, to make sure that your house is in order. And I used to say to my staff in the emergency department, when our house is in order, only then have we got the legitimacy to ask other people to have their house in order. But let's put our energy into things we can control, because frankly, we can't get access to beds in the emergency department, but we can make sure we're doing our job really well. And funny enough, the more we had our focus on the things we could control, the more and more our influence grew.
Brian, I just wanted to change tact a little bit, if that's okay, because we have a question here that's specific to the End PJ Paralysis campaign. So the question says, you talk about changing dialogue from falls risk to safe mobility. How do you approach people who are scared of patients falling and might oppose people who oppose your movement?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and we've been there. First of all, come from a place of kindness. I think that's the most important thing. Try and understand what are their fears, and this applies not just to this, but to anything. If people react in ways, seek to understand and be curious and compassionate. That's really very important. And it's not always about the evidence, although for many the evidence is enough. It's also about the emotion. So we don't make our decisions rationally, we make them emotionally, and often apply a post hoc rationalization to justify it. So find out what are the emotions underneath it and start with them where they are and move them on that journey. What's fascinating, and cigarette smokers, I've never had, but so, the most ardent anti-smokers are the ones who previously have been smokers. And talking to people today, even, they've said that those who are the most challenged by, we're running it's done off the back of an app that we've created. Some of those are a bit nervous are now the greatest advocates because they can see the difference. And this is where the data comes in, because they have found they've gone from 10 falls in August in this unit to 1 fall in the whole month. Give them that data and let them say, do you think this is working better for us? Because it feels like the data is showing us, and our patients are happier and our staff are happier, and leave them on their journey. But I'm also a great fan of n equals 1 is not a veto. Sometimes it's like a bus. Bus is going anyway, and everyone brings you happiness. Some by coming, some by leaving. And sometimes it's just like, this is the direction of travel. We're going this way. We would love you aboard, and this is what we're going to be doing. So don't hold back for one. Trust the many.
So I have one final question, and it also has a comment. So the question says, the comment is, this was a very inspiring session. And I know that you covered something about what made you think about NPJ paralysis, but the question is, what motivated you to think about this beautiful campaign?
Oh, thank you. It's very gracious. I think I've been spending a lot of time thinking about time. And a lot of that emerges out of the great work here in Canterbury. But this is, time is what connects the systems, waiting times, waiting for people to call you back, waiting because you're too long in hospital, that causes harm, running around looking for stuff. 70% of budgets in healthcare are spent on time, because salaries and wages are the purchase of our time. And I was thinking, how do we make something manifest out of this slightly existential construct? And it came, in fact, from a conversation with a physio assistant in Broken Hill. Because in Nottingham, I said, wouldn't it be cool if we got people up and dressed? And then it started to formulate and crystallize in Broken Hill. And what it was a rehab unit. And he would take the shoes of the patients to the gym with the patients. And he said to a patient, is it okay if we, can I put their shoes on? And they said yes. And when the patient said, well, if I've got my shoes on, I might as well get dressed. And it all kind of built from there, really. So it emerged out of and this is why it's important to have a hinterland, thinking broadly, thinking widely, having people who you trust and like to bounce ideas off, like Aveline Casey, for example, in Dublin. And it just, sometimes things come because it just feels the right time. What I'm proudest of, in fact, believe it or not, is the last 1,000 days, because that came to me as a construct fully formed. And very briefly, I'll describe it in these terms. If you're a man, you can expect to live to about the age of 79. And if you're a woman, you can expect to live to about the age of 83. But if you're a 76-year-old man or an 80-year-old woman, what have you got left? What you have is 1,000 days. Now, if you live past the age of 10, you've survived your childhood. But actually, with that last 1,000 days, how many of them would you choose to spend in hospital? And all of that just came into my head, fully formed. And out of that chrysalis, and I've been talking about that for years, then out of that emerged NPJ paralysis. I think it's about being open to opportunities and dreaming out loud at high volume. And I'm very, very blessed. And I'm really, really proud of being a nurse. It's my career simply consisted of saying yes and seeing what happens. And can I just encourage all of you to do the same? And sometimes you get it wrong. I've already got a chapter that's called My Chapter of Heroic Failures in Things I Did. But I kept going. And that's all I would say is for just keep going, have stamina, believe in it, and it will come.
Well, I think that's a fantastic point to end on, Brian, and this has been a hugely inspirational session, I think, for all of us on the call. I know I'm going to be hugely unpopular by calling time now. We've got lots of questions still left to cover. Maybe we could get some of your time at some point to cover those, so that we can answer the questions for people. And I'm terribly sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them. So it just leaves me to say thank you ever so much, Brian, for your time today. It was a fascinating session and we really appreciate it. And thank you everyone on the line for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.